Is there something that needs to be turned on? How do I test this? It to the.
Um, this is not the first time I'm presenting in Delhi, and I'm pretty excited by the crowd that I see here. How many of you here are, just to understand, and hope that my presentation is going to make meaning to all of you. How many of you here are Drupal developers? Okay. And how many of you work in non-development roles but in Drupal? Okay. How many of you already know what's responsive design? Okay, so take me through my simple walk you through text of a very modern, a very niche thing that is today just responsive design. I'm going to just share some key principles of responsive design and key ideas that we should keep in mind when we build responsive websites. And then just quickly also take through some aspects of how these can be achieved in Drupal. So before I get started, I'm Shyamala. I work for Unity Solutions. We are a Drupal house in Chennai. We also have a product called Unity People Power, which is our main product, which is an social media corporates. So moving on to responsive design. Through this presentation, I'm just going to bring forward the need of why we need to build responsive websites. So this could be a good customer pitch for any of you who are on the business side or in the development side. If you need to speak with your seniors to iterate why today the approach must be responsive, dwell upon what responsive design means, the key terminologies which, since most of you are familiar with Drupal programming, must be familiar with. What is fluid design, what breakpoints mean, what HTML5 media queries mean, a peek into what responsive images are. And the last part is the most interesting part where we can understand what are the aspects of responsive design that are going to be available for us in Drupal 8. So, starting with the need for responsive design. Today, most of our customers are utilizing or viewing our websites only in devices or iPads or Android phones. Of course, there are still a sizable number of people viewing them in laptops and other devices. You could always ask, why should we build a responsive website? Why not just have an iPhone app, an Android app, and then have them download and use that? But if you see, the mode of communication today, the way these websites are accessed are through links. You might be sending it or sharing it through social media, you might be sending it as emails, and when the user clicks on it, irrespective of the device at which he views it, it should open something where he can see what that website stands for without it collapsing, or because we did not design it for that particular website. So it is important as much that we may have apps that cater to specific needs. Websites are built in such a way that they are responsive and they do not, they work in all devices. So the question then boils down to, how do we support all these multiple devices? Are we going to have different code bases for each of them? Luckily for us today with HTML5 media queries, we can build a solution which is simple, which can be around a single code base, which is standard based, and can be viewable in multiple devices. So rather than my stating what's responsive design, I just picked this quote from Ethan Marcotte's page, and he is one of the pioneers in responsive design. And he says, rather than tailoring disconnected designs in ever-increasing number of devices, it's better to create an optimal viewing website that can be viewed and which have standards that allow it to be viewed in multiple devices, and that's what is responsive. So the key thing is here, we need to understand that the number of devices is increasing constantly. The challenges are going to be constant. We can't start catering to each of them. So we need to be standard based, and we need to code in such a way, in a minimalistic manner, in such a way that we can ensure it works in all devices. I think as developers, this is something we were used to. If with respect to browsers, now it's just extending to devices. When we used to write code, if it worked in IE6, it will work in any browser. So something similar to that. We need to ensure that we write code that works in, it doesn't break or it doesn't collapse just because that particular device doesn't support a feature. We need to be conscious of all the features that are supported and how it should degrade if a particular functionality is not available. So for those who are totally new to responsive design, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to demonstrate how by resizing the browser, you can see how a website responds to different device sizes and how it will look in various devices. One of my favorite size is the foot sense. Can you see how the logo moved and the menu has become horizontal? So the interesting thing about this site is that it brings, in fact, a change in the entire layout as the site becomes smaller. Can you see the way the site menu is changing as we make it smaller? Two other interesting sites are the Starbucks. You must try it out on your devices. It beautifully, this uses a column drop approach where the columns fall one below the other. What's a 6 grid becomes 4 and then becomes a single column. This site also introduced the toggle menu feature, which is very useful in devices. In devices, you must note that navigation is not very critical. It's very important that a mobile user is presented the content, and the navigation shows up only when it's needed. So this toggle menu is a very frequently used technique to display menu in devices. Boston Globe is another very interesting site that is responsive. So going back to the terminologies which you need to understand is fluid grids, breakpoints, media queries, and responsive images. Fluid grids, everybody would have heard of 960 grid system. It's a system which is used to design websites, make sure that everything aligns within a specific grid. It helps us to structure the HTML better. And fluid grids not only have a grid associated with it, they also shrink or reduce based on the width of the screen. So in fluid grids, everything is defined, the HTML, CSS is defined as a relative measurement. It's what they say as target divided by context is the result. So everything is a relative value. The next important thing is talking about responsive design is to understand the meaning of breakpoints. What is taught while designing a responsive website is that you design for certain breakpoints. You pick certain device widths, you pick certain screen sizes, and then say, what does my site look in this? How does it look in this? How does it look? Which ones do I want to target? That was the initial approach. And they used to base the designs on these device widths. But this is not a very a good approach, because with the ever increasing number of devices, you will then be forced to look at varied number of options. Instead, as a designer, it may be good for you to design your website and see how it should degrade based on the design. What this means is if you have a fluid website, at certain points beyond a certain width, the fluid design starts to look awkward. The way you have positioned your blocks may need to be reorganized. That should be your breakpoint. So you need not keep the device in mind, rather have your design in mind and let your design dictate what the breakpoints are. So breakpoints are essentially widths at which the website changes. What a truly responsive design should do is define breakpoints based on how the content flows. The next important terminology that you should understand is media queries. These are pretty simple. So with HTML5, you can write media queries which will allow you to detect the type of device or type of the feature that a particular device possesses and load style sheets and functionalities based on these features. So this is a new concept that has been introduced in HTML5, which is widely used in responsive design. The last key terminology that's associated with responsive design is responsive images. Here, with response image includes videos, any multimedia assets, slideshows that we want to have in our website. So it's important that not only your website is responsive in terms of content, even the image and assets that you load is optimized for the device in which you're viewing it. You may be viewing an iPad, it might have a greater DPI. You may want to load a better resolution image in it. You may be loading it on a small mobile phone where the bandwidth may be a constraint, so you will load images that are optimized. So it's important to understand the different concepts of images. One is DPI, another is the size of the image. Another important aspect as designers that we should consider while designing responsive images, it's not always good to scale images. Sometimes in lower resolution, this is what they call the art direction. That is, you bring focus to an image. So for the mobile, you might load a totally different image. The Barack Obama image is a very common example where if there is an image with a background that is being viewed in a desktop, in a mobile, you may just want to focus on his face rather than just shrink the image. So when you are doing a responsive design and utilizing different modules in Drupal to build your site, Also understand what is it you're trying to deliver to the customer. It's not just enough if it shrinks and shows up. Is it conveying the same meaning? Is the content getting translated better to a mobile user? So have the user in mind when you're viewing your site and delivering these responsive images. Yeah, so just going back to Drupal. These can be easily achieved in Drupal 7. You can have media queries that can get embedded into your info file, and your theme can get responsive by embedding different grids or style sheets based on the size of your screen. You have modules that facilitate responsive design. You can use the Breakpoint module. This, basically what this does is, it allows to standardize the breakpoints definitions across modules. You can use this along with the responsive image module to set image cache presets for different breakpoints that you want to have in your site. And another interesting module is a flexi slider, which is a responsive slider which helps to bring a responsive image gallery in Drupal. Some good starter themes for responsive design are Omega, Adaptive Themes, and Zen. The most critical aspect of responsive design. Most of the responsive design that we've spoken of till now and the modules that we've used all take into account HTML5 compatibility, because most devices that we have today are HTML5 compatible. But IE 8 and IE 9 do not support HTML5. So it's not, I should say, any concern, because we have these JS files. These JS files help us in HTML5 Shiv. It builds these elements dynamically using JavaScript. So the same HTML5 elements that are not recognized are available to us through JavaScript. Respond.js helps to bring CSS support to media queries to IE8, and Selective Shiv brings in CSS3 styles to IE8 and IE9. So including these into your theme folder, the same HTML5 designs that are done for the other browsers and devices will also get optimized for IE. A very important aspect of responsive design. In fact, the word responsive design is also used with two other terminologies. It's also, they commonly say, mobile first approach. There are many reasons for saying the mobile first approach, because when you take a mobile first approach, what happens is whatever code that you write is optimized for the mobile. A mobile user has many constraints. He has a space constraint. He may not have enough bandwidth. So you'll ensure that your files are optimized. You don't have too much CSS. You don't have any baggage, or you don't load large background files. So your default style will always be a mobile first style. So what downloads will be a mobile style. And if it is a better or larger screen, then you draw additional styles which will change the layout based on it. This way you can ensure that the front-end performance is also optimized based on the device. All the tools like YSlow, Google Speed, all this can also be used to optimize your front-end performance. The exciting part is with Drupal 8, it's going to ship with a default responsive theme. So a pride for all the Drupal users is that Drupal allows us to be current, and it allows us is always in touch with the latest. And Drupal 8 will ship with a default theme which is responsive. The other important responsive features that are available are, it has a responsive admin toolbar. It brings in breakpoints and pictures not as contributed modules but into core. It brings in responsive layouts, and the Spark initiative also brings in a lot of editorial features which will be responsive and available in multiple devices. It brings in Modernizer, which is a tool that helps in polyfilling all the functionalities to IE8 and IE9. So for those of you who are already working in responsive design, who want to stay up to date, please check out the responsive design issues that are happening in in Drupal, and you will get the mind share of the community. You will not only understand the concepts of how things are being utilized, you'll also get the knowledge of the wisdom of the Drupal community users who are working on Drupal 8. Many of these initiatives will help you to give back to your customers better quality code. So some of the other initiatives are the mobile initiatives and the HTML5 initiative. Thank you. Any questions?
We talked about image cache and images in these different platforms. So how do we manage all these images? Does Drupal does that of its own, or we will have to create image cache for different sizes available? How do we do that? So a single page, we code okay, for this particular page, this image cache should be implemented. Now, for when we don't know that which the page is being opened in which platform.
You're right. So what happens is there's a module called responsive image that, along with the breakpoint module, allows you to configure breakpoints at which you want your image caches to change, and configure what is the dimension of the image that needs to get loaded at different breakpoints. In fact, the breakpoints need not be just width, it can even be DPI. So it brings a configuration interface for you which will allow you to do this. Essentially what it does in the back end is, that is very important aspect, because whatever I've spoken up to now is some of which is preloaded into the system, which hits the performance. And in the SaaS concept, you use a lot of Ajax and load things as required, which increases the performance and makes it more responsive to the needs.
I meant more like using SAS or CSS as a pre-processing language for CSS, which is a much better way of writing CSS. And SASON is a theme actually, which is developed by Schilder at Innovate. It includes SAS because, for example, Omega doesn't use SAS. It's pure CSS. So I was just, if you wanted to kind of elaborate on that.
I'm not very aware of that. I know that there is a lot of, on server side, Ajax loading that is done in responsive sides to increase performance, but this particular aspect I'm not aware of.
SAS is a meta language for CSS.
Okay.
So it's a better way of writing CSS and it's responsive.
Are you aware of any Drupal theme that is using this?
SASON, we are using that in fact.
Okay.
It's SASSON, if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Okay, SASSON.
So it's a very, in fact, is a lot more powerful and in fact a leaner than Omega.
Okay.
And it has a, for example, HTML5 shave built in, normalizer JS built in. A lot of these modules are built in, and you can choose the grid system that you want to use.
Okay.
Zen, Susi, or even the new one called Salsa.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting theme for anybody who wants to check out responsive as well.
Uh-huh.
For Drupal 7.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to share? It doesn't have to be a question. On
You were talking about using modules to do certain things that are responsive. How about not doing that? I mean, SAS again. In SAS, you can use mixins, which are these complex functions that you can create in CSS. That obviates the need to actually put in a module and activate that, because the more modules you activated in Drupal, you have you have to deal with performance issues. You have to deal with a bigger bootstrap and all that stuff.
very much.
So you can obviate a lot of these things. For example, responsive images, you don't need to use them, or breakpoint module. You don't have to load those as separate breakpoints or modules. You can actually achieve a lot of that within the CSS code itself using Sass.
Okay.
That makes sense.
It makes sense, but if you need to bring some things into configuration, like if you want to give your editor the option to configure different images, image caches, which need to be dynamic, you may want to build an interface to configure these parameters. And what the breakpoint module does is, in fact in Drupal 8, is it synchronizes and leverages the breakpoints that are available in theme in modules. I'm not aware of how Sass does that, but it cross-pollinates the breakpoints so that there is consistency across themes and modules.
That's why Sass is very, very useful when you're dealing with breakpoints, because it makes things really, really simple. You're not coding anything in CSS.
Okay.
In Sass, you define your grids, you define your media query separately, and you can call your breakpoints very easily.
Okay.
So that's why Sass has become kind of a darling of responsive designers. That because things get very hairy in CSS, so we just code in CSS. In Sass, you can use mixins, which are these complex functions you can create, and you can define your breakpoints very easily. You don't even have to go to the point of, for example, loading responsive images separately from a separate image cache.
Okay.
I'm just thinking Sasson is an interesting thing to look at. People kind of overlook that because in the Drupal community is mostly let's do it the Drupal way, but then sometimes it can backfire.
True.
Responsive is not the Drupal way. You can actually go the other way around, go responsive, and then incorporate that into Drupal, rather than going the module route. Is what I'm saying.
Do you want to demonstrate something on Sasson?
I don't have it right now on this, but it's something, it's something people want to look at it. There's a lot of information on the Drupal project, Sasson itself.
Okay.
Does it one require to have the knowledge of Ruby in order to use Sass?
No. It's a gem. Okay. Sass is a gem, that's it. And it comes with Compass, which is the compiler.
Should I just open the Drupal page?
Yeah, sure. So all you have to do is, you don't have to code anything in Ruby. Okay. You just have to have Ruby installed, yes.
Okay.
And you just install the gem, and you install Compass, and you work with Sass separately. But essentially, it is free coded. It allows you to code CSS in a much more organized fashion, and allows a lot of variables and mixins or new concepts that you cannot do.
So is it exactly like the pages which has been automatically done by Firewall?
Any other questions? Thank you everybody. Before I close the session, just want to remind you about the hackathon tomorrow. So all Drupal developers, themers, project managers who are interested in, there are different levels and different ways you can contribute back to Drupal. You can just make an edit on a handbook page. You might just use a module. You may have found one of the steps that you actually ran through on the handbook page is missed out, which you could add to it. So you can just go edit and submit a document update. That could be a way to contribute. You can help people on forums on IRC chat if you're a Drupal developer. And you can work on the issue queues. The issue queues, like I mentioned earlier, is a very, very good place for you to be in current with what's happening in Drupal and how things work in Drupal. It gives you the insights, debates of people who are working in Drupal, why they're using features, and how it's actually getting built. So even if you don't spend, even if you can spare an hour a day or 2 hours twice a week, if you can consistently spend this dedicated time on Drupal.org, there's lots of things you can do to give back to the Drupal community. And tomorrow is Drupal Camp Delhi is providing you a unique opportunity to sit in one place and collaborate and contribute back. It will be a good opportunity. Those of you who are interested, please sign up at the reception desk for the hackathon. Thank you very much.